everyone. This is James back again. Um, so, I've recorded the entirety of the how-to Umpire School session. It was about an hour and 10 minutes long. And then when I stopped streaming and found, I don't know what caused it, but basically it got cut off about halfway in, um, right at, right after, as towards the end of explaining the map section. But everything else after that got lost, unfortunately. So I am making a part two to cover everything that was lost that I intended to cover. So we were able to cover what makes a good scenario, kind of the basics, and then also talking about objectives, uh, and also designing maps and uploading maps in a TTS or tabletop simulator. Now we're going to talk about pieces, how to get pieces that you want, doing some things you can do to modify the board, screenshots and updates, and then general organization. So, talking about pieces, there's a lot of ways you can design and upload pieces. And I've seen Marshall do some tutorials, like there's very basic ways you can do it in just Paint. There's also templates out there that let you upload it into Photoshop software like GIMP, and you can color and modify it. I've done that before. Um, and a lot of people have a lot of fun doing that. I making pieces is the least enjoyable part of the whole experience, so I'm happy to use. Damon has created a bunch of generic pieces for different time periods, and so I really like to just use his. So he has some for the Civil War period. I'll show those real fast, and then he has what are these ones? He has some for called black powder, but Napoleonic black powder era, and then even some ancient pieces. Um, let's see, I don't know. I think that might get some of them. Yeah, yeah. So he's got different pieces for different periods, and they're kind of generic. But if you flip them over, you can type onto the back of them, and then that reads onto the front. And that's the way I like to go. And it makes it easy. It does take a good amount of time to color and design and upload and do a piece. So I like using his. This is what they look like for the Napoleonic ones, and then for the ancients. Um, but if you do want to make your own pieces and color them, I'll very quickly show you how you do that. Um, Maybe not making the template part because there's videos on that. But once you have an image and you want to just upload it into Tabletop Simulator, you can upload objects, components, custom, and then you pick a tile or a token, put it out there, and then like I said, if you have the image already, so you can see here, these are some that I made for a game I did, American Revolution New York game. So you just pick an image, upload to the cloud so it can share with others. I usually do the smallest thickness they can, and then you just import it. And if you do one image, it'll do the same on both sides. I can't remember how you make it different on the other side, but that's basically it. So it'll upload it in there, and then you've got your piece, and you can use, if you hover over it and plus or minus it, push plus or minus on the keyboard, you can resize it, and it's pretty easy. Once you have the image made, it's not hard to get the piece on there. Of course, with every individual piece you make, you gotta have a separate image, and you gotta upload each one. It does take a lot of time. That's why I like using Damon's pieces that he's already created and provided. There are other objects that I use when I'm umpiring that I like to use, and so basically I've found them from other modules and other games that people have, and once you find something you like, you can just right click and save object and give it a name, and then you'll just have that in your object list from now on. So I have things like measuring sticks that I use, smoke tokens to signify when artillery is firing or a infantry line is firing. I have disruption tokens. These are ones that I made specifically that that I use. And there's cool ways to merge objects so that they have different states. Like these tokens, that you can see it says 4 out of 7, so there's 7 different states for this token. And that way, if you hover over it, just click a number, it just cycles between those states, which is pretty useful. And then like wound markers I use. I didn't make that, but that's the one I use. And then the one I love to use is this fog token. Whenever there's fighting, I throw fog in there, and then I add more and more to help create real fog of war. So I love these little fog token or fog effects. Those are the ones that I typically use in a game. Some other ones that are useful. Of course, I have all sorts of fire effects. Sometimes I like different kinds of fires, depending on if there's explosions. Or players always like to set things on fire, usually wagons or bridges and things. So it's good to have a few fire effects. There's one, I think it's this one. I've started liking this one for like cannon explosions, because it looks like a little explosion. I've not found anything better for an explosion. There's even effects like if you want to add rain. This one's a little bit wonky, but it gives rain in a certain rectangular area. So if you just throw that box out there, you can add rain to a battlefield, which is kind of fun. Let me look at other objects that I've sometimes used. Time tracker, other rulers, breastworks. If they're building breastworks, you can courier tokens if you're tracking. I've used ammo tokens, supply trackers, those kind of things. Yeah, so that's it for pieces and objects. I won't go too much more into that. Now, one cool thing about tabletop simulators, I learned this, you can change the lighting. So if you go to options lighting, you can change the light intensity. So if you want it to be nighttime or late night or early dawn, you can change the light intensity. It looks cool, and then alter it throughout the battle. That's a cool feature. And there's a lot more you can do with that. I did explain locking a little bit in the maps, but if you have an object and you don't want it to be selectable or move around or whatever, you can lock it. If you grab it and hold down L for a second, it'll lock it in space. So now it's hovering there. It's not going to go anywhere. And if you right click, you can select it, but if you try and left click select, it won't do anything. If you hold down L again, it'll unlock. That's useful if you want to keep something in place for some reason. Alright, so let's talk about doing updates for your players. So you're in the midst of a battle, you got the pieces, you got the map, you've resolved combat with whatever system you have. Now you got to give an update to your players, whether it's play by post or a live game. And so typically, not always, but typically any picture you want to be with the north up and always oriented that way. Otherwise, it can be very disorienting for the player if you're always rotating the field of view. So at least for Civil War games, I always do north up. With Ancients, I actually have a different way I do it, but I'm not going to show that now. So, and then you want to show basically what the commander can see. Now, I had this snipping tool that came with my computer. I've known some people that didn't have one; they had to download it. Most come with it, but whether you have it or you have to download it, there's usually some kind of snipping tool, and then they have different options for the way you snip. So you can do a rectangle, the whole window, or freeform, which is usually what I do. And so freeform, so let's say we're doing it from the point of view of this commander. You want to show everything that he could see. And sometimes you show a little bit more because it saves time in your updates. So this guy is kind of at the top of a hill, so he's going to see, but there's a lot of smoke around, so he may not see much of the enemy units, but he'll know that they're there and shooting. So you may show just the edge of the units and some smoke, something like this. So for this, commander, he's on top of this hill. He can see the battle, all around him. There's a lot of smoke obscuring things to the northwest, so he can't see the enemy units very well, but he can see that they're shooting. To the southwest, they're not shooting, so you can get a better view of them. So something like that is what you would show as a screenshot. And then when you give an update, whether it's you want to be descriptive and make it as realistic as possible. Um, there's some great umpires out there in the Kriegsspiel Society that do an excellent job at this, in my opinion. Otto does, Ruse, Great Gold, and Tunisgrad are some that I've seen. Um, they make it, the way they describe it makes you feel like you're a real commander and things are happening around you, and that's great. So the more descriptive you can be, the better. And one way to think about it is you can think about the five senses. At a basic level, usually describing what a person sees. So you can say, well, there's a battle happening all around you. Um, lots of shooting, men are dying, things like that. But the next level is describing, well, you can hear, artillery fire blasting to your east and west. Um, you can talk about smell. You can smell the sulfurous odor of gun smoke or, you know, dying men or something like that. Talk about touch and uh, and feeling as well, even. So the more description and the more senses you can use, the more realistic it can be. It can also sometimes be fun to add just a fun element, maybe something that's not directly relevant, but just adds a little bit to the story. Recently I've seen posts about a fish that a commander was eating at the time, which had, it really wasn't relevant, but just kind of fun story wise. Um, and another thing you can do in reports is rather than you as the umpire just saying what happens, you can have it presented to them like it's a courier or an officer reporting. So rather than, say we got this general right here and he's watching this battle around him, and you can say, well, Brown's and Kelly's brigades are for disruption, they're about to break. That's a very generic, small, simple update. Or you could say, a courier runs up to you from Brown's brigade looking, his arms blown off, and he says, Brown sent me to tell you that he doesn't think the line can hold much longer. Something like that. It's not much, but it just makes it more real when you have it reported that way. So when you do reports, just think about ways you can make it more detailed, more realistic, and in the end, more fun for the player. All right, let's talk about organization. And this is more specifically for play-by posts. So play-by posts. And a little bit ties into live games, but it's more for that. So I'm going to show you my Discord. And I'm going to show an old game to show how I had it organized. We'll do Lynchburg. So with a Discord server for play-by posts, there's some. The more you organize yourself, the easier it is. And if you've never done one before, it took me a while to figure out all these things and what works best. But I usually, in terms of channels, I have a channel for people showing up, somewhere where they can talk, just in general, a place where they can get rules and info. And I make sure that the permissions, for that one are set. So you can see everyone can view it, but they can't send messages. So it only lets the umpire post messages, so people can't start talking on channels they're not supposed to. That way, when you get into it, the players, there's not that much there, so they don't have to scroll up to find info. I have a deadlines channel where I always just post when the next update is, and I ping everyone so they know, and I use Hammer Time. Hammer Time is a website. If you just Google Hammer Time, I think it'll come up, and it lets you put in. Let me show actually. So you just put in a date and a time whenever you want the next deadline to be, like that. So that's the time, and that's my own local time, and then you can copy whatever format you want. I usually do the longer one with the most info, and then it saves you to your clipboard, and then you paste, and it looks funky in there, but when you hit enter, Then it looks whatever time. So this is my time, 9 p.m. Friday, but whatever local time it is for someone else, it'll change to them. So that's very handy to coordinate different time zones. But post deadlines, so players know when their orders are due, and then post reminders leading up to it, because they need all the help they can get. I have a place for spectators to talk. I have a place for umpires to talk. Dispatches if I'm tracking them. A place where I save the umpire AAR as the game goes, so it's really easy to make available at the end of the game. Of course, in this one, the game's over, so I had some after party channels. And then channels for each team or group. Usually I have an info channel with info specifically for that group. A planning where they can do initial talking before the game starts if that's how the game's set up. And then individual channels for each player. That is the basic format for play-by-posts and organization. One other thing that really helps is using roles. So when you start a server, go into settings, roles, and you can create all sorts of roles, whatever you want, and assign colors and whatnot. And then once the roles are created, when you get players and you assign them to teams, you can just assign them a role. So when you create a channel, I'll just create a new channel just to show. Let's make it private. And then, so when you create a channel, you can assign what role you want to see in that channel, or who you want to see that channel. And so if the roles are created, you say, okay, I want spectator and union to see. And then whenever you assign anyone the union role, they'll automatically see that, so you don't have to add them to every single channel that applies to them. Another channel, I don't have it in this one because I didn't want each team to know the other's order of battle, but in case it can be known, if it doesn't matter, I'll have a channel for player assignments, so you know who's on what team and what role they have, which is a helpful reference. I didn't have it on this one. Another useful thing is if there's a channel that you don't want people to be able to post so often for whatever reason, you can slow it down up to 6 hours, so they can only post every 6 hours. I usually do this on channels where they only need to post once and never again, like if they're requesting a role, and I don't want to have a bunch of conversations on that channel, so I can see who's requesting what. But it's also useful if you're in some kind of game where they can talk to each other, but you don't want it instantaneous, so you want to kind of simulate sending snail mail or whatnot. You can use slowdown on a shared channel to simulate that. It can be helpful. Sorry, I'm going through my list to make sure I covered everything. In general, when you're setting up a game, you want to make it clear for the players as much as you can, you know, what to expect in terms of how often they're supposed to be posting, what kind of posts are reasonable. One thing about Kriegsspiel that's interesting is we don't share the rules with the players, so they're not trying to min-max the rules or game the system. And at first I didn't like that feature, now I love it, which is interesting. But you don't share all the rules, but you do want them to understand, the setting and what's reasonable. And the more you help your players understand what's expected, the better they'll be able to play. Okay, finally, we'll talk about being an assistant umpire. So if you want to umpire and you've watched this, you've seen the tutorial, still not sure about it, the best way to start is just be an assistant umpire to someone else's game, either live or play-by-post, and you'll learn quickly. And you can be an assistant umpire without having to know the rules or the system. Very often in a live game, whoever is hosting it will take the role of like a master umpire, where they're handling the combat. And so your job is basically you'll be assigned a group of players, and you will, once the combat's resolved each turn, you'll help take screenshots, and then post it on their channels, and then you'll, if it's, I'm talking live now, you'll relay to them verbally what's going on, give them an update, and then take their orders, and then bring their orders back to the Umpire channel. And depending on how comfortable you are, as you get orders, you can just move the pieces around yourself if you know movements and the rules around that, or if not, just tell the umpire or draw arrows and let him resolve it. But that's a good way to start, to get your feet wet and figure out how to umpire, and then you can progress from there to hosting your own games. Um, so I think that's all I wanted to cover this time. Thanks for calling in for part 2 of how to be an umpire. If you have any questions, post them on the YouTube channel, and I'll monitor that and try to answer them. And maybe there'll be a part 3 to answer all the questions that come. But with that, I will say goodbye and thank you.